Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting www.jewishinsider.com. We are delighted to be joined today by His Excellency Omar Ghobash, UAE Assistant Minister for Culture and Public Diplomacy, who oversees religious tolerance for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rabbi Bruce Lustig, Senior Rabbi at Washington Hebrew Congregation, Reverend Johnnie Moore, President of the Congress of Christian Leaders, and Dr. Elena Procario-Foley, Driscoll Professor of Jewish Catholic Studies at Iona College. Our guests join us less than 24 hours after yesterday's historic ceremony at the White House, when the United Arab Emirates and Israel signed an accord normalizing relations. Today, we will hear the compelling story of UAE interreligious initiatives, particularly for the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Moderating this conversation is Rabbi Noam Marins, AJC Director of Interreligious and Intergroup Relations. After we hear from Noam and our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, that's questions plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. Noam, you and our esteemed guests have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. Bruchim habayim to our wonderful guests and to our listening audiences. Yesterday was a very dramatic day, a day for history, a day where another two countries, under the encouragement of the United States, signed accords with the State of Israel, specifically the UAE and Bahrain, joining Egypt and Jordan from a generation ago, the first two countries, and now have doubled the number of countries within the Arab world who have agreements with the State of Israel. It was a day of celebration for the people of those countries, for their leaders, but also for AJC, for American Jewish Committee, because we have been invested in relationships in that part of the world for more than a quarter century, under the leadership of AJC's CEO, David Harris, and Director, Chief Policy Officer, Jason Isaacson, who has traveled to the region more times than one can count, on his own, together with delegations, in order to demystify the relationship between Jews and Muslims and enable us to reach a day where yesterday's celebration could be possible. And even as we celebrate that great geopolitical achievement, and AJC is celebrating that in part by opening up an office in the UAE, our first office in the Arab world. Even as we celebrate those achievements, we know that there is another story that is not as well known or told. It's a story that is dear to AJC and to the Jewish people. It's the story of the interreligious breakthrough that parallels the UAE-Israel Accord. And for that purpose, we have a wonderful panel. And I'd like to begin by welcoming His Excellency Omar Ghobash, Ambassador. Before we speak about the interreligious breakthrough, I think we would be remiss if we didn't hear how an Emirati diplomat felt yesterday during that monumental event on the White House lawn.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's really a great honor to be able to speak to you and your viewers today. And if I could just say Shana Tova to begin with, just to put that out there. I want to give you a little idea of my own personal background on the question of a relationship with Israel. My youngest son told me a few days ago, Baba, your dream is coming true. What he meant was that my dream of peace between the Emirates and Israel, and actually the broader Arab world and Israel, was something that I'd spoken to my children about. When I was 12, I was particularly interested in history, and I was at an English language school in the Emirates. Traditionally, we would import these history textbooks from the UK, and there were mysteriously always a few pages that had been cut out. And we don't really know what those pages were, except that my textbook, for some reason, had been missed by the censors. And I got to read about the Holocaust. And I can tell you that that had a profound effect on me from the age of 12. I then came across a book by a survivor of the concentration camp, Sobibor. And I devoured that, and I realized that we were living in a kind of a world of indoctrination. And that was part of, the Arab nationalist movement, that there was an Arab consensus, at least when I was growing up, this would be an ideologically presented subject. And from then on, I developed a deep interest in all things related to Israel and Judaism more broadly. To the extent that I would, I'd be listening to Yiddish folk songs. I discovered that not many Israelis would listen to Yiddish folk songs, but I definitely felt a connection for some reason. And then as time went by, when I was appointed to my position as ambassador to Russia, I kind of asked my boss, at the time as the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, do you mind if I reach out to the Jewish community? And he said, absolutely, go ahead, you must. And so I did, Chief Rabbi of Moscow, and then Chief Rabbi of Russia, Pinchas Goldschmidt and Beryl Lazar. And that was pretty much from the first day of my arrival in late 2008, early 2009. And, it's been such a source of pleasure and wisdom and an honor to be able to interact with the Jewish community. My hair stood on end when my boss, the foreign minister now, told me a while ago that we were going to recognize Israel. It's such a sea change. It's such an upending of all of the taboos and all of the stereotypes and all of the kind of ossified thinking that we've been kind of suffering under for a very long time. And one thing that really sort of popped up, and it's a question I asked my fellow Emiratis, how did we go from this general Arab indoctrination to welcoming peace, and all of a sudden everybody popping up and saying, I mean, on the Emirati side, so many people, so many young people are saying, I want to go, I want to learn, I want to understand. I even met a young lady a few weeks ago at my brother's house who said that she was, working on kosher food, and she was like mixing Emirati with kosher food. So I thought, wait a second, this indoctrination of hate didn't work, and I find that fascinating. So if I could just say one more word on this. Now that we're moving beyond the rhetoric and the power of taboos, we're actually going to be able to evaluate truly what it is that Israel means in the Arab world and to the Muslim world, and how we can actually move from ideology to politics and actually engage with each other and figure a way out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We consider you a new friend.
Thank you.
To add to the many friends that AJC has with the UAE. We heard in recent months from the leadership of the UAE, first the ambassador to the UN,
yes, addressed
AJC, and then during our global forum, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, sort of telegraphing yesterday's event in advance that there was movement happening, and indeed quite imminent. We'll come back to you in a few moments, Ambassador, but I want to turn to Reverend Johnnie Moore. Reverend Moore has traveled extensively in the Middle East, even before he was a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, a body that is well known to AJC, Johnnie, because of Felice Gare, who had a long tenure, including as chair of the commission. We American Jews, the wider audience, know well about evangelical support for the state of Israel. What's a little bit different about your narrative is your interest in evangelical Muslim dialogue. Could you tell us a little bit about how does that work?
Well, I can relate to His Excellency's experience as a child, because as a child, my father lived in the Gulf 30 years ago. And so I would, periodically, he would travel from business back to our home, and he would bring these gifts for me from this mysterious place. He would tell me stories about people that he had met. He embedded in me a fascination with a part of the world that I would only come to visit the first time when I was much older in college. But my love for the Middle East and for the Arab world preceded my first experience. And so I began to have a personal passion about building these bridges between the Christian world and the broader evangelical world and the Islamic world and especially in the Arab Gulf, but also throughout the entire world. And what I found was that there was an incredible foundation to build upon, and really that foundation was first in the UAE. I was amazed to hear the story about the great Sheikh Zayed providing land for a hospital that evangelicals wanted to start in the UAE, that became the hospital that His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Zayed was born in, and so many of the leaders of the UAE. And so, the evangelical community is a huge community. I mean, there are at least 60 million of us in the United States. There are over 10 times that around the world. We're one of the largest religious communities in the world now. But we had roots in the Middle East as well. It's just that it took what I've come to learn about the Middle East actually is that the most valuable commodity is not in the ground. It's not a natural resource. It's trust. And the one thing that needed to be built was trust. And so I started visiting, but then lots and lots of other evangelical leaders started visiting, and we found that as a community in the world that has a high view of God and that views religion as something that can be a blessing to the world, not a curse to the world, that we found our Abrahamic brothers in another part of the world. And then the last thing I would say is in recent years, we've seen the worst of religion try to tear apart peace. But what I've come to realize is that the solution for the worst of religion is the best of faith. And a few years ago, largely led by the UAE, religious leaders all around the world decided, to stop reacting, but to start working proactively on promoting peaceful coexistence. And what we found is millions and millions of people were ready for that. It just took leadership. And like everything, if the United Arab Emirates is going to do something, they're going to do it big, and they're going to bring everybody to the table. And fortunately for evangelicals, we had some roots in the Arab soil to begin with. And so this was an amazing experience to sit on the south lawn of the White House yesterday and to watch peace bloom. And I can't wait to see what's built upon it from here.
Thank you. Rabbi Lustig, you and I had an experience that we will never forget for the rest of our lives. 2 years ago on Hanukkah, we were in the UAE at the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies, and a dozen rabbis lit Hanukkah candles in the presence of Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya. Is it okay to say that a great miracle happened there? That's the phrase that we use when we describe the Hanukkah miracle. And the reason why you were there, because of your leadership, among other things, in the UAE Higher Committee of Human Fraternity. Could you tell us a little bit about that wonderful language and what it's all about and put it into the context of this conversation.
First of all, thank you so much, and Your Excellency, thank you for joining us, and Reverend Moore and the doctor, good doctor. It's an honor to be with each of you. I want to jump off and just tell you that I believe that what was really so remarkable sitting on the White House lawn was seeing certain things come to fruition. I give the UAE credit fully for what happened yesterday in so many ways, because I believe it's what both His Excellency spoke about and Reverend Moore spoke about, and that this is the fruition of what I would call religious diplomacy. And that is that for close to a decade now, I've been traveling to the UAE. I've been honored to be a student of and participate with Sheikh Ben Baya and the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Society. And Noam, when you joined us, and you were correct, we had over a dozen, but what's amazing is when I started there and it was a guest and a speaker there, we were Judenrein. We were without Jews at all. And over the last 6 years, over 50% of the speakers, scholars, presenting in the UAE on important topics about peace and other things, really, we're all Jews. We're all leading rabbinic scholars. And that the interchange on this intellectual level, I give an incredible honor to Sheikh Ben Baya, and more importantly, the incredible courage to Mohammed bin Zayed for having the courage. You know, I'm wearing a pin, and I hope the ambassador will speak about it. It's called the Year of Tolerance, and I'm sure that the doctor will speak about it as well. But the word tolerance in English does not capture what the Arabic is. The Arabic means about inclusion and other things. I was part of a group of people, and I'll finish with this, that what happened yesterday on the lawn was a result. There was a Caravan for Peace that was put together. We brought imams, rabbis, and evangelical ministers to the Middle East, to Abu Dhabi, to Morocco, to meet. We have over 60 of them now that are triads in each city, and it was really face-to-face. What do we need to know about each other? So this religious diplomacy, this openness, this warmth, this ability to fill the void for years of what was political diplomacy failure, the UAE and its embracing of others really filled this. I was honored a year ago to be placed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam on something called the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity. It is 11 religious leaders, I'm one amongst them, that are promoting the document for human fraternity, which was signed by Pope Francis and was signed by the Grand Imam at a celebratory event in February of 2019. And last year we celebrated, and this year, yesterday, a commission was just announced by with great members like David Adama Ajay, who the former undersecretary at the UN on against genocide, and who's so important. These people have been put on, and there's Sheikh the Ben Zayed has an award that is going to be given, which I believe will become similar to the Nobel Peace Prize. So yesterday, you're right, lighting the Hanukkah candles was so important, but the miracle is the world recognizing the really incredible openness of the UAE and the Muslim moderate world to really embracing all people of every faith in every way. It's an example for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Bruce. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the pioneering effort of my colleague, Rabbi David Rosen, AJC's International Interreligious Affairs Director, who has been traveling to the region for well over a decade and is well known throughout the Muslim world for his pioneering work in Muslim-Jewish relations and setting the table for the kind of work that we're doing, linking interreligious with geopolitical as an essential element of what we do. Dr. Elena Procario-Foley, my dear friend, you are the Catholic on the panel. You are a scholar of Catholicism. You are a scholar of interreligious relations, particularly Catholic-Jewish relations. When it comes to Pope Francis, we can say with complete authority that a picture is worth 1,000 words. He's not only the leader of 1.2 billion Catholics, but he is the most visible religious leader in the world. And when he does something, people take note. What does it mean that he chose to make a pilgrimage to the UAE, to the land of Islam, with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, to sign this document? Put it into a Catholic context for us, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Marins, and to all of my fellow panelists as well. Indeed, Pope Francis is following in a tradition, a contemporary tradition of what you might call the traveling popes. But even further, back in history, in his address, in one of his addresses when he went to the UAE, he said, "With a heart grateful to the Lord in this 8th centenary of the meeting between Saint Francis of Assisi and Sultan al-Malik al-Kamal, I have welcomed the opportunity to come here as a believer thirsting for peace, as a brother seeking peace with the brethren," I would say, and the sisters as well. "We are here to desire peace, to promote peace, to be instruments of peace." So he himself put the journey to the UAE and the historic document that he would then later sign into a much larger context, taking it back to his namesake, his papal namesake, Saint Francis. So I think that's really important. I would remind our viewers that Pope Paul VI in 1964 began what I call this tradition of traveling popes. And he came through Jordan in 1964. And as a friend of mine said, another scholar, you know, proving that breaking boundaries and borders and has a long history. In 1986, Pope John Paul II gathered religious leaders from around the world in Assisi for a great meeting of interreligious dialogue. And in 1999, at his Rome assembly, Pope John Paul said, "As we study the history of other religious traditions as well as of our own, we confess that much has gone wrong in the past. We must recognize and acknowledge these wrongs, express our sorrow, and condemn what deserves condemnation. We must commit ourselves to do everything in our power so that such actions or omissions not be repeated. Such steps can foster a process of understanding and reconciliation." And so Pope Francis going to the UAE is continuing this tradition, breaking new ground, bringing in physically new places, new nations. It's part of what we call Catholic substance, our sacramental tradition. Be where you are, be on the ground. Viewers might remember images of Pope John Paul II kneeling every country he went to and kissing the ground when he got off the plane. Pope Benedict XVI, the first pope to enter the Dome of the Rock in 2009. So I think this is part of a very strong tradition of the Catholic Church participating in really important substantive bridge building, relationship building, dialogue, so that we can come to world peace and come to this vision of tolerance, as one of you just said, this rich word in Arabic. So much more than you be you and I be, you know, over here, but respect, appreciation, what the Lutheran scholar Christopher Stendhal called holy envy for the other's religion. Hans Kuhn, go ahead.
So I want to give His Excellency an opportunity to put the context of the UAE Interreligious Initiative, to link it to your description of the visit of the Pope. Ambassador, if you were to do a pop quiz of literate people, they would not immediately guess that the UAE is the center of interreligious dialogue. We need to educate people about this. Tell us why the UAE is involved in this, and what does it mean? What's the philosophical underpinning, and what are the practical tools?
Right. Well, that sounds like a PhD thesis, which I think is a little unfair on me first thing in the morning. Dr. Elena, can I say I love the idea of holy envy? I've scribbled that down, and I'm going to look into it more. It's a very powerful idea. When the Pope visited, it really was quite a breakthrough moment, I think, for us in the Gulf. There's some very, very powerful voices within Islamic theology that says, or that say that, you know, the Arabian Peninsula should not be touched by non-Muslims. And so for us and my leadership to say we are going to be broader and more generous, we're gonna make a broader and more generous reading of the faith and welcome the leader of the Catholic Church was really a remarkable move. And it sent a big signal to people like me who have been hoping for something like this, to say that actually we can be confident in our religion as well as accepting of others. So it really was a remarkable moment. But it does, you know, because I've spoken to my leadership because I get personal time with them. It's very interesting to see how this idea of openness to the other started. And it really does start in the desert with the founder of the Emirates, Sheikh Zayed. And, you know, was it an intellectual position? Was it a theological position? Or was it more rather an expression of his fundamental humanity and generosity? And I think it really is that they're, you know, these were not literate people. They had not, you know, interacted with the wider world. And yet they recognized that people are people. People are humans. We deal with each other on the basis of that fundamental respect. And we don't pry into their particular orientation or religious kind of understanding of faith. And that's something that has been held on to and transmitted from, you know, the early 50s straight through to 2020. And I think there is a very clear line that connects our desert forefathers who lived in absolute poverty and lived incredibly hard lives to today. So that, you know, in a world of plenty, at least in the Emirates, you know, we've been blessed with natural resources. For us to continue that spirit of generosity is you know, kind of what makes us so proud. I hope that answers your question to an extent.
Could you give an example programmatically, and perhaps even talk about beyond the interreligious, may I say, the battle within Islam, the combating of extremism? This is linked to that. Am I correct, Your Excellency?
Absolutely. I think, you know, going back to September 11th, that was already quite a shock to the system, quite a shock to traditional Muslims to witness such unbelievable and unacceptable violence in the name of Islam. The reaction to that was not necessarily, you know, sort of the best thought out, but there was an immediate reaction, which was that this is not what we are about, and therefore let's go out and try and change that image globally. But as time went by, I think we began to realize in the Gulf states, at least, and parts of North Africa, that the problem is deeper, that there are these very powerful currents that are funded in certain ways, that you know, where you have astounding amounts of psychological manipulation, people with an agenda to push. And actually we needed to fight back against that rather than some misunderstanding globally. And, you know, as time went by, we began to see more and more public statements of openness, and to the point where we actually developed, we established a ministry for tolerance. and we have a minister of tolerance. And, you know, initially the reaction to these kinds of things is that, oh, this is a PR issue, this is a communications matter. Actually, it's not. It's creating structures that allow us to then push ideas and to fund ideas and to legitimize a whole new set of thoughts. And it's important because in our part of the world, particularly within the traditional Islamic tradition, there's kind of a hesitancy, a reticence about new ideas. And what the Emirates has continually done has said that, look, we will be innovative and inventive and creative, not only in the commercial and economic sector, the technological sector, but also in the world of our supposedly fundamental beliefs. And that, again, allows us to welcome the Pope. It allows us to publicly and grandly state that we will have a mosque, a church, and a synagogue side by side and on one platform. This is saying to young men and women in the Emirates that we are proud of our tradition of openness, and we will institutionalize this so that there is no doubt that you have no fear of exploring these ideas and interacting with those who differ from you. And then finally, you know, for us to be able to say, well, we now recognize Israel, it's a fantastic kind of culmination of this path of openness and tolerance, and being able to say that, look, we must be able to work together, and if there are things that we disagree on, then we agree to disagree. But it doesn't mean that we shut down all ties, we shut down all forms of communication, because that leads to a world in which, well, we're simply not going to be able to move forward. And I think it's also a recognition that the world has changed fundamentally for us, at least in the Gulf, from a desert community to you know, being a global hub or at the very least a regional hub in terms of logistics, transportation, finance. There's a tremendous amount of ideas coming in, and it's up to us to say, well, we live in a multicultural and globally connected world. I mean, we are fully connected. And we need to make space for our children, our own children, who don't necessarily tie into the desert or the seafaring background that we come from. And that explains why so many young men and women are able to immediately link up and connect and understand and communicate with young Israelis today.
Reverend John, thank you, Your Excellency. Reverend Johnnie, you know that when I did my research about your connection to this region, I found a wonderful quote that you said extemporaneously during a virtual iftar sponsored by the UAE Embassy just a few months ago. You said, more and more I think of Abu Dhabi as a sort of Switzerland of religions, where religious leaders gather. That is an amazing quote, but of course, even more amazing because you're an evangelical leader. So elaborate a bit. It fits in well with what His Excellency was referring to.
Well, look, it's not just that the UAE has become a gathering place. It's what they've done with it. You know, when His Excellency, you know, facilitated the visit of Pope Francis, it wasn't just that Pope Francis was invited. It's that the Mass was in the stadium. It's that the whole country was shut down. It's that the Mass was translated in Arabic. You know, the first thing I did, you know, the more, and I was also there, not as a Catholic, as an evangelical, and the first thing I did the morning of Pope Francis's visit is I went and I looked at the Arabic papers, not just in UAE, but all across the region. You know, and that takes leadership. You know, and I you know, I spontaneously said that because that's exactly what I feel about the UAE. You know, and unfortunately, religion has been given a bad name in our world. And what the UAE is doing again and again and again is saying that religion is actually part of the solution. It's not part of the problem. And we don't have to be fearful of those that are different than us. We just have to have relationships with those who are different than us. And we're not asking you to set aside what you believe or who you are or your vision or your view for the world of the future. We're just asking for you to come together in good faith and to say, like, this is our world. You know, it's the future of our children. Like, what can we do? What can we do together to make it a better place for everyone? You know, and I'm not just an evangelical leader, you know, I'm a millennial evangelical leader. Okay. I'm part of this young generation that wants to see an entirely different world. You know, and I'm a profoundly religious person. I just believe that, as the rabbi said a few minutes ago, this is a triumph of religious diplomacy. You know, in my experience traveling around the Islamic world, and not just the Arab world, but the broader Islamic world as well, when I sit down with a leader as an evangelical, there's a lot to talk about before we get to any politics or anything controversial. We can talk about our view of God. We can talk about our love for our family. We can talk about our passion for hospitality. You know, and as evangelicals, you know, we probably the most iconic figure in our entire history was Billy Graham. You know, and Billy Graham very famously crossed the boundaries all around the world as a representative of the great peacemaker. You know, as I sat on, I'll stop with this, but as I sat on the South Lawn yesterday, I was remembering that powerful half a sentence in the Gospels, which says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And the fact of the matter is that the UAE is a peacemaking nation, not just in the context of this tectonic shift in our world, but all of the other diplomacy happening, wars that have stopped, people that have been introduced to one another, other things happening in front and behind the scenes. The world is a better place because of the leadership of this country. It's just that the UAE was willing to do what no one else was willing to do. They were willing to look at religion as part of that equation. But in 2019, in an incredibly prosperous year around the world, I have to say, even as a devoutly religious person, if I was a political leader, I might have chosen to make that the year of exponential growth, the year of greater prosperity. But the UAE chose the year of tolerance, and those words spoke volumes to the entire world.
Thank you. We have time for Rabbi Lustig and Dr. Procario-Foley to enlighten us from a Jewish and Catholic perspective regarding the themes that are in the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together that was signed by the Pope and by the Grand Imam, because it is a remarkable document that more people need to read. Rabbi Lustig.
So very briefly, I just want to, I can't emphasize as much, and forgive me, I think the word in Arabic is tasama. And as a noun form or whatever, but we have to understand the English word tolerance is such a poor translation of it. It's so inadequate because it means indulgence, it means openness, it means welcoming. And so this is, to think about that the government established a minister over this and spent an entire year having a year of exploring what this meant. That is a remarkable example. And out of that grew this visit by the Grand Imam and the Pope, which was historic in so many months, addressed to them by another great move, and that is placing Sheikh Ben Baya as now the head of the Fatwa Committee, looking over all the things. And this is an 88 or 89-year-old leader who is has at his heart the understanding, not political gain, but a wealth of wisdom and knowledge in which he wants to bring peace to the world. So the document of human fraternity stands on the foundation of the Marrakesh document, which David Rosen was at, and others, the Marrakesh document, the Alliance of Virtue, which was signed in Washington, D.C., and also facilitated by Sheikh Ben Baya. These are wonderful documents, and these are documents that call on all of humanity to recognize that we're all created in the image of God. And what is our responsibility? Now, what is so important is the independence. In order to fulfill that document, the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity was established. That is, the government is the patron of it, and The Pope is involved and the Grand Imam, but that group of 11 religious leaders, we are absolutely independent. And that is an incredible statement. And what we do is to try to further those concepts of human fraternity, dealing with poverty, dealing with the issues of women in the world and what's going on, dealing with human trafficking, dealing with the fact that the least amongst us needs to be taken. In Hebrew, we say, Kol Aravim Zebazeh, that we're all responsible one for another. That is at the core of this document, saying that we're part of one human family. And what does that demand of us morally? Yesterday on the White House, I think that you talked about the one line in Christianity. I will tell you that in Psalm 34, and David, Noam will correct me, I think it's verse 15, is that it tells us to be rodef, that we should be pursuers of peace, that we should be pursuers, we should seek peace and make peace. And that's an incredible, and I'm sure Johnnie will correct me, I think it's Psalm 34:15, but I'll let him do. But that is what that human fraternity document does. It asks the whole humanity to look at one another as creations of one God and what is our responsibility to each other. From a Jewish point of view, there's nothing that could be greater than that. We will read on Rosh Hashanah the creation story, and we will understand that that is the most important moral question that is asked of us when it's asked, Ayecha, where are you? And we must do that. So thank you.
It seems to me, thank you, Bruce. It seems to me, Elena, that the document that Catholics and Jews know best, Nostra Aetate, which transformed our relationship, or the Catholic understanding of Jews and Judaism, that this document is an heir to that document. But we also see that Nostra Aetate, that transformed the Catholic understanding of others, of non-Christian religions, just began to skim the surface of pluralism. This document goes way further in its understanding of pluralism. Could you say something about that? And we have 2-3 minutes before we got to turn to questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll speak New York fast. Yes, Nostra Aetate is a transformative document, and it has paragraphs on the relationship to Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam. And yes, it's very, very short. And it's also out of the Second Vatican Council in the mid-60s, as the Catholic Church renews its relationship to the contemporary world. And what's remarkable, actually, is that wider context. Then the second paragraph of the introduction to human fraternity almost reads like another document from that time period, where that document talking about the church's relationship to the world began with these words: the joys and hopes, the griefs and sorrows of the people of the church are the joys and hopes, the griefs and sorrow of the people of this world. And now we have this document signed, by the Pope and by the Imam, saying this. It's virtually the same thing. We share the joys and the sorrows and the problems of our contemporary world. Rabbi Lustig laid out the themes beautifully. The agreement that we are made in the image of God, this foundational religious tenet that we need to spend our lives meditating on. What does that mean? So this document opens up Nostra Aetate in terms of religious pluralism, in terms of human cooperation, social justice, advocacy together, because it's all of the document and this greater notion of tolerance in the Arabic understanding of it, and that etymology. It's all about solidarity, what Pope Francis calls human ecology. And also, I would note in the line of St. Francis that the human fraternity document also refers to the earth, the globe, our common home, as Pope Francis has called it. So this document links our care for the earth and the earth crisis with all of the political issues, the poverty issues the military violence issues in the world that we have to confront. And it's an exciting document. And you're right, Rabbi Mehrens, everyone needs to study this document. And we have to make it part of our education.
They should visit forhumanfraternity.org. It has the entire document and it's worth the read.
Absolutely.
It reflects Pope Francis's singular agenda of integration, the inseparableness of the human condition from political currents and environment and finance, how it's all linked together. Before I ask Daniel to share the questions that he's beginning to receive, I want to give a shout out to the Jewish community of UAE. Every single Friday, AJC leaders join now virtually with the Shabbat services in the UAE. It's one of these remarkable gifts of this period. And I can't imagine how thrilled most of them, if not all of them, expatriates, but they are part and parcel of the UAE community, giving credence and credibility to the Abrahamic family house that is being built in Abu Dhabi that will host a church, a synagogue, a mosque. Daniel, it's all yours.
Thank you, Noam. And since you just mentioned that, we did have a question from Aviva Hartman in Washington, D.C. for you, Rabbi Lustig. If you can discuss a little bit more about the Jewish community in the UAE, particularly in Dubai, and what can you tell us about that community?
So yesterday there were representatives from both the Dubai community and also the council. There's a Jewish council of the Emirates, what has been set up, and Ross Keel has been very involved. Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, there's now a chief rabbi that has been set up, and Chabad has been there as well. There's great effort, and what I'm so impressed with is that this is a community that I was delighted when Noam and I were at the forum. They organized and we had kosher meals there. There was kosher meals being served through the auspices of the UAE, and that at the signing of the document of human fraternity. The openness and the inclusivity is incredible. Those communities have been operating for a long time with the blessings of the government, with the support of the government, which is incredible, and really with the blessings and so much of the Crown Prince. And I think that that's something to recognize. I want to just shout out in that same sense, His Excellency Mohammed Mubarak, who is the Minister of Cultural Affairs in Abu Dhabi, has been instrumental as a member of the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity on securing the reality of the Abraham family house. I hope our viewers will look at this. This is going to be one of the wonders of the world when it is completed. This is a platform that is built that is going to have by David Ajay as the architect, and is creating a synagogue, a mosque, and he is working with the Jewish community and the council there, and with members of the higher committee to make sure that all three houses of worship are as inclusive as they can be. I think that we're going to see great strides in that, and it was such a blessing to see so many members of the Jewish community leadership there on the White House lawn, that they came to support what was being done and this birth of opportunity that's there.
My second most favorite photograph after the video of the Hanukkah candle lighting in Abu Dhabi is the sign where the kosher food was being served. I don't think my grandparents who were born in Bialystok would believe me if I told them that I ate kosher food in Abu Dhabi. And I turn to Daniel for the next question.
Thank you. Our next question is for Ambassador Ghobash. This is from Yassine Moro in Paris. 2019, as was discussed, was UAE's Year of Tolerance. Might other nations adopt similar initiatives, and what are the UAE's plans to follow up and share lessons learned with other nations?
Yeah, I think that in general, the UAE leadership likes to think of leading by example, and we would welcome other countries following in that vein. There are many other areas in which we cooperate with other countries, very much under the radar on the simplest of things, sort of government management, accounting, and stuff like that. And if they wanted, we would be happily welcome their interest. Sorry, the second question. I always forget the second question when asked.
It
was about whether. Go ahead, Daniel.
It's whether the UAE would assist other countries in some of these efforts.
Yeah, of course, with pleasure.
But it's relevant, if I can expand it, Your Excellency.
Yeah.
There's a movement in the Muslim world of countries doing this independently and also in an integrated way. Am I correct? For example, Morocco.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think, the rise of ISIS had a massive kind of effect on so many different Muslim communities. And there's been a lot of introspection, which may not have taken place in the past. But there's a tremendous amount of introspection and a lot of younger voices coming into the discussions and the debates. And, it's the younger voices that are really kind of framing the questions now. And so, yeah, there is this desire to both, be true to their faith, but at the same time live in a world with others. And it's not as straightforward as, sort of government edict deciding that this is what we're going to do. But it certainly helps when the government is actually sort of opening up that path and showing the direction that we want to go in. And I think it's up to the younger generation to actually begin to participate and vocalize their concerns and their aspirations.
Thank you. Daniel, we have time for one or two more.
We have time for a few more. Our next question comes from Maxine Mercer in Philadelphia, and this is for Dr. Procario-Foley. How can the diverse Christian community be an ally to the Jewish and Muslim communities and promote tolerance and understanding within their own communities?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much. I think we have a near 70-year history of doing that sort of work. So Rabbi Noam Marins mentioned the Catholic document Nostra Aetate from 1965, but there was a document from 1947, which was an ecumenical document of various Protestant leaders and the very brave Holocaust survivor and Jewish scholar Jules Isaac. And that document in 1947 was called the 10 Points of Salisbury. And both of these documents and volumes of other documents since have laid out these principles of dialogue. And it's been a long, slow process of coming to trust that, as Reverend Moore had said, you have to build these relationships. You need to get that resource of trust with each other. And so Jews and Christians have been having these dialogues, and the dialogues happen differently because of the different theologies of the different Christian denominations and the different forms of Judaism. That's getting a bit into the weeds, but it's all about starting with a relationship. Have a congregation and a synagogue meet and do a service project together, run a soup kitchen together, build those relationships, start talking, get to know each other as a human, right? And that we are made in the image of God. And then the next steps are to build the historical background. What was wrong, as I quoted John Paul earlier, we have to look, and Pope Francis has said this too, we have to be honest about what we've done wrong. And the Christian churches have tried to do that. I know the Catholic Church certainly has in a variety of official papal documents. And get that history out there, admit it, and then move towards what brings us together. what in our texts, what in our religious traditions bring us together. There's so much more that we share than that divides us. And you can do that through text study of sacred texts. You can do that through comparing rituals and life cycle rituals, and you have these dialogues. So I don't want to take up more time from people. Hopefully that begins to address the question. And I do want to say that we've been doing this as Jews and Christians since the end of the Holocaust or the Shoah.
Daniel, do we have time for one more quick one?
We do have time for one more quick one, and this comes from Stephen Beasley in St. Louis, and we can perhaps begin with you, Reverend Moore, and perhaps conclude with Ambassador Ghobash. What role do you think religion can play in diplomacy and in solving conflicts?
I believe that there would have been a lot more peace and a lot fewer conflicts if religion would have been at the table to begin with in many circumstances. In many failed states and failing situations, religious leaders are the only leaders left with any moral authority. Religious leaders can bridge gaps that are otherwise unbridgeable. And in the case of this amazing peace between the UAE and between Israel and Bahrain and Israel and all the other conversations going on, the evangelical community has often been a very helpful intermediary as friends of Israel and friends of the Arab and Islamic world increasingly. That's just one example, but it's not the only example. There are many, many circumstances around the world where political leaders are unwilling to engage religious leaders when perhaps the very most powerful tool that they have is to pick up the phone and call local community leaders who understand what's going on and can make a difference when all the power and all the military might in the world can't cause two people to decide to extend a hand to one another and try peace one more time. So it is the least utilized and most effective tool in diplomacy, in my opinion.
Your Excellency, you're going to have the final word before we bring it to a close on that question for a moment, please.
Well, religion has a massive role to play in diplomacy, and I think one of the things that we've been fighting against from the Emirates is the narratives that dehumanize the other, and it is through our really taking back control of our narratives that we are able to now humanize the other and be able to engage. And I think the Emirates has taken a very active role, as everybody has recognized, in the field of religious dialogue, to really make sure that our children will grow up with the children of others in a way that is accepting and respectful and recognizes the dignity of every human being.
I want to thank the panelists. I can't think of a better way to celebrate what took place yesterday on the White House lawn, in which the United States, the UAE, Bahrain, and our beloved state of Israel that is cherished by AJC and the American Jewish community came together to bring a close to a very challenging year on the planet and to show us that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We have an expression in our Sephardic liturgy, which is appropriate since we're discussing the Middle East, from a liturgical poem called Achot Kitana that Sephardic Jews chant on Rosh Hashanah, on the new year, and it says, Tichle Shana v'kilelotea, Tachel Shana uvirchotea. May the year and all of its curses come to an end. Year and all of its blessings begin. I think we have ended this challenging year on a very high note of promise, of hope, of geopolitical success for Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, under the leadership of America. And we've understood in this context how significant the interreligious platform which help to build the foundation can be. I can't think of a better aspiration for our new Jewish year. So I thank the four of you and all our listeners, and I turn it back to my colleague, Daniel.
Thank you, Noam, and I would like to thank our esteemed panelists and our global audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed this program, please consider making a donation to AJC at ajc.org/donate. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shana Tova to all.
Not to
Happy New Year.